to the Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and after the international break has come to an end, we have Philadelphia Union Soccer this upcoming weekend against FC Cincinnati in a game that I consider must win for the Philadelphia Union if they want any shot of competing for that Supporters Shield trophy at the end of the season. But we got some news that Jesus Bueno, and I'm sure we'll talk about that again later on, had to leave Venezuelan national team camp due to a knee injury. Today, he was out in practice with Daniel Gazag, who also had a knee injury at the end of the New York Red Bull game. So Jim Curtin will give us an update, but I guess that's good signs that both of those players were out in training today in Chester. But I thought, I love Tom Glarder. He's been on the podcast a lot, but it's time to try to get somebody else on here. And this person has called a ton of FC Cincinnati games this season. I feel like Orlando City as well. And funny enough, both of those teams just played each other, not this weekend, but the past weekend. But if you guys aren't familiar, you guys know the name and the title. If you're not familiar with his work, he's the lead analyst for the USL Championship, one of the co-hosts on the fairly new USL All Access show on SiriusXM, and one of the analysts for MLS on Apple TV. He is Devon Kerr. Devon, how are you doing?
Todd, what's up, bro? That is quite the intro. We got to figure out a way in this day and age that we should be able to use acronyms for all of it and just start throwing out crazy words and be like Mavemshnum, like Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. I still remember that, by the way.
That's crazy, dude.
But thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, certainly a crazy year and have seen a ton. Great to be involved as always. And most importantly, appreciate the opportunity to be with you all fine folks. And for everybody at home that doesn't know, there's a special place in my heart for your squad up in the Northeast, which stems back a couple of years. I started calling games in 2017. I didn't go full-time until 2018. Special relationship with a bunch of people in Philly. Go way back. John Hackworth is a mentor of mine. Brendan Burke, a good friend. So though we don't have video for this, I do have the 2018 Bethlehem Steel kit on, which to me, obviously, it mimics the Union jersey, that 18 kit with the white with the blue collar. So one of the most fired jerseys there ever was to walk this planet. Just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of wish the Union would have kept that name for their second team instead of going to Philadelphia Union too. But yeah, I guess that's what MLS teams want to do in this new MLS Next Pro. Just put the 2 in part of their second team. But yeah, it's such a sick kit. And if you guys haven't seen it, I guess I'll leave a picture in the show description for you guys. But man, Bethlehem Steel, what a time it was.
Tied for the most, although it was a different team then, tied for the most U.S. Open Cup titles of all time. Did you know that?
I did not. So
Bethlehem Steel, as well as, I believe is it Maccabi Los Angeles? Oh, that's a great, this is what happens when you put me on the spot. I get myself into trouble. I believe it's Bethlehem Steel and Maccabi Los Angeles, if I'm not mistaken. Maccabee. I don't want to mispronounce that. I apologize. Tyler's gonna be mad at me now.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Tyler. I texted him, I forget what game it was. Maybe it was the New York City Philadelphia Union game, and I was like, man, I enjoy listening to your guys' calls. Like, you guys just straight vibe. Like, that's what I get.
Appreciate it, dude.
And like, you guys, like, it's like, yes, I know you guys are calling a soccer game, but it's like you guys are in the bar just talking, and you guys so happen to have soccer in front of you. And it's been, I think, very refreshing to have you on MLS calls. Like I said, you've called USL for how many years now? Forever.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you and Tyler, I think, actually call Phoenix Rising games, right?
Yeah, we were paired together back then. It was the good old days. Ah, yes, the years of yore that were just 4 years ago. No, it's first of all, thank you for the compliment. It truly means the world to us. We're not blowing smoke, man. Our interaction with fans and the ability, whether it's out in person at the stadium, having an adult water, or even just plain bubbly, whatever it may be, before and after the fact, we love that, man. Just to be able to hang out with you guys, because we're fans too. Like, everybody that is involved in this industry will always tell you, Todd, that it's trying to find the relatability factor and making sure that they feel like you're in their living room or they're at the bar with you. Like, to your point, like, you should feel, as we should, that we're just kind of hanging out, having a conversation. And at times, that conversation is going to be emotional and it's going to be filled with a lot of comments. Other times, we're just sitting there watching the game like you all are. Tyler and I do go way back, though. Actually called my first ever official game in the history of broadcasting with him. and it was RGV versus, which is Rio Grande Valley Toros, in USL Championship. At that point in time, was an affiliate of Houston versus LA Galaxy 2, Los Dos. So, crazy how far it's come. The Phoenix Days, 20 wins in a row. Like, who wins 20 games in a row? That was a joke. Dollar beer night and all the craziness that was, but wouldn't trade it for a thing. And, when he departed for MLS in the spring of 20, I guess it would be considered winter, actually, late February, prior to COVID. It was never, for him and I, it was never goodbye. It was always, I'll see you in a little while, see you later. We didn't know when that was going to be, and we're fortunate enough that now we're paired in MLS, and we'd like to think that we're doing a semi-decent job and just making sure that we grow every single time that we go out, and we're certainly having fun doing it. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, it comes off every single time, and I like every time you're in a new city, you're asking for food recommendations for the fans or people just live in the area, and it seems like you guys get some pretty good recommendations, and hopefully you and Tyler take up the people that recommend spots for you guys, and hopefully none of those spots have been bad, but I'm sure maybe there's been a couple.
Everybody makes mistakes in life, let's be clear. But yeah, you know what, honestly, like it's kind of like an overpowered Yelp in a sense of things. True. Right? A trip advisor for going places. It's like, hey, first of all, if I'm ever going to go somewhere and watch a game, certainly I'm going to talk to the locals and be like, yo, hey, where do I go party? Where do I hang out, eat, sleep, blah, blah, blah. Certainly for game days where I'm like, listen, I want to see what you all are seeing. I want to experience, the local watering holes, the food that you're having before and after matches or during the week and the lead up to it. And obviously the great restaurants as well. I would say that it's probably been a 95% hit ratio in terms of how well it's gone. It's been great. I will say, I guess I got to talk to the head brass because I haven't been to Philly yet this year.
That's what I was going to say. Like, why hasn't this happened, right?
Well, my boy, who, by the way, never met him, think he's an incredible broadcaster. I admire him. I've heard he's a great person. My boy, Danny Higginbotham, gets all the first picks for Philly, obviously. So I give it to him. Nothing but love for that guy. He is so good at his job, both in game and in studio. And my experience with him, started to admire him as a Premier League announcer, and then obviously he got a chance at Philly. But yeah, he picks up all the Philly games. So like the only time that I step in the state of Pennsylvania for two reasons, all due respect. Number one is for college because I call NCAA for ESPN, lead analyst for them and for ACC Network. So I get to do stuff for Pitt all the time. Nice. Was just there a week ago. Love it in Pittsburgh. Philly's a different vibe. My whole family is Penn State, true and true. My dad's from Newcastle. I got family all over the state. Those are the only two times that I get to come back. I would love to add a third option to come hang out with you all fine people because the backdrops that have been on the games that I've called, the great stories that I have behind the scenes are usually only from afar. And the Philly games that I have called, you guys have been on the road. So if you could put in a good word, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll say, hey, Danny, let Tyler and Devon have a shot at this. So
we could bribe them, like let's slip them something under the table. It could be water. It could be beer. I don't know what, a little amuse-bouche. I don't know what he likes.
We'll have to find out and get back to you, Devon. But yeah, I mean, it's been a blast. And I think MLS did a really good job putting you and Tyler together. I don't know how that process worked, trying out different people, but they definitely got that one right to reunite you and Tyler. And I've been pleasantly surprised, I think, by just the whole pairing of Apple TV. Just wasn't really sure how that was going to go with the local announcers pretty much gone. And it's like, okay, well, you enjoy listening to these people because they know the club through and through. And you and Tyler have done a fantastic job, I feel like, calling so many different games. And it seems like you guys have been calling the games for a while. So, another compliment for you. Not trying to blow your ego up too high,
no,
but
you're good, man.
Yeah, it's been a great surprise, like I said, by MLS this season, just listening to the great men and women that are calling games for MLS this season.
Yeah, appreciate you, brother. I think one of the most difficult things is certainly that home feeling, that relatability factor that we were talking about earlier about us coming to town. I've never lived anywhere where I had that in my life. So I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. And as I just mentioned, my whole family is Penn State. So Nebraska is the land of Lincoln, like Big Red, Nebraska football. So growing up in an area where that's not part of your life, it's weird, right? Like my parents bought a Nebraska helmet, took a knife and chiseled the N off and put blue tape over the middle in order to buy a Penn State football helmet for my brother for Christmas. That's kind of like the world that I lived in. So where I'm going with that is the announcers that people become so engrossed with in the best of ways. I never experienced that in Nebraska. We had brief stints in Texas and New Orleans, but again, like I was there for a year and a half. Even when I moved to South Florida, my roots are somewhere else. You know, my family, the Northeast, the Penn State aspect of it for sure. The Midwestern in me that, although not a part of Nebraska football, the kind of everybody love everybody type feel, if you will, and trying to make sure that you're friends with everyone is a Midwest Nebraska feel. When I come to South Florida, it's the Heat, it's the Dolphins. The Panthers they just had come into existence when I moved down here. And there weren't, voices have changed, and I just didn't have that in my life. So I can't imagine what it was like for someone to go from having the same voice in the best of ways over and over again, and then all of a sudden they're gone. The only, I guess, analogy that I can make to it is what you started with earlier, is Tyler and I doing the Phoenix Rising games. And so I guess, online seeing brushback, I'm not necessarily saying directing at us, though everybody takes their fair shots in social media, but seeing the brushback in general from fans, totally get it, because when Tyler took off for Chicago Fire, when he became their voice, and I had opportunities come to me that meant that I wasn't necessarily calling every Phoenix Rising game on a Saturday night, fans were perturbed by that. And I think that comes down to people being willing to do the work, which, as you mentioned, a lot of people are. And it's going to take time to, take me as an example. I'm familiar with MLS because I watch it, and I'm a student of the game, and I nerd out on this kind of stuff. Like, I just happen to get paid to do it now, which is awesome. But not knowing what you guys were regularly doing in 2015, JP Dellacamera would have known that. Like, mid-game, he could have gone, hey, in 2016, 2017, they went through this. Yeah, I could tell you about that in 17, 18, and 19 because I was around, but I wasn't around 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So some of that just comes with reps, right? And seeing a team regularly. So you mentioned Orlando and Cincinnati earlier. It's easier for me to talk about them than it is for Vancouver because I've only seen Brian White and Co. once this season. Now, I watched them, but there's a very big difference between watching a game, scouting a game, and calling a game. The way that it breaks up, your mind just works in different manners. So I do agree with you that I think the league did a really good job of gathering talent and putting everybody together, getting most of the pairings right. And would also say that what you see now is probably going to be different in the future because you don't know what that holds. You don't know what talent's waiting in the wings, and you don't necessarily know what the pairings are going to be in a year, 2, 3 years from now. All that I hope as a broadcaster is that they continue to give people opportunities, first and foremost. Number two, that fans are willing to kind of ride this roller coaster with us because it's super fun and learning about it. And number three is that it truly takes time. We're starting a network.
Yep.
Like, honestly, this is a brand new TV network. I know in the digital age, people don't necessarily view it that way because you don't hit your television. It's just right there. But although it may take 2 or 3 more clicks than you're used to, this is starting a network from the ground up. So certainly trials and tribulations, growing pains, difficult. But yeah, I'm with you, man. It's been a fun ride so far. And it hasn't been easy, but enjoyable. And I'm sure there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better, Devin. And everything that you just said, I mean, I've said the same thing throughout different points throughout the podcast this season. And, there's always going to be errors, but, you learn from those errors and make your product better for the future. So, yeah, I don't really understand why there's so much judgment and people act like, oh, this is the end of the world, where it's like, you just said, like, you're building a complete network. And of course, you got to go through those trials and tribulations, and it'll come good. But we talked about you calling Cincinnati games, Orlando City games, and you won that call last weekend. And Cincinnati's coming off that 1-0 defeat at home to Orlando City, a game that you called, as I mentioned once again. On one hand, this might be a shock for some around MLS that Cincinnati finally lost at home in MLS this season. But on the other hand, coming into this match, Orlando City had won 6 on the road. So maybe it shouldn't be a shock to people that Orlando gave Cincinnati their first home loss. Sergio Santos had a goal ruled out for offsides after a great line-splitting pass by Lucho. Brandon Vasquez played a great ball into Bupenza, who flubbed his shot. Cincinnati, they just weren't clinical like they normally are. 31% of their shots were on target. In that game, they averaged 37%. So, why do you believe Cincinnati struggled so much to get shots on target to create chances against Orlando City?
Well, I got a couple of different theories on this. Number one, it's kind of crazy to me that I had the privilege in a week's span, which was obviously 3 games in 8 days, to watch Orlando beat both number ones in the East and West, because I was also on the call for Orlando versus St. Louis. And the St. Louis game was different because Orlando's pressure from the beginning was pretty incredible and unrelenting and just kept going and going and going. And St. Louis just offensively didn't have their best. And I do think that the pressure over time kind of pushed them down. I don't feel the same way about the Cincinnati game, Todd, and here's why. Cincinnati, you mentioned earlier, they had their chances. The Cincinnati game against Orlando reminded me a lot of the loss for Cincinnati in terms of chances in Open Cup against Inter Miami. So I wasn't on the national call. CBS had Dre Cordero and
Ray Hudson.
Ray Hudson on the call for that. I did call the world feed for U.S. Soccer, and sitting there watching it, it was just kind of like one of those things where it didn't really matter how good or bad you were on both sides of the ball, and we'll get there in a second structurally. Just actually giving yourself chances. There are times, I mean, how many times have you watched a Philly game where you've kind of just gone, yeah, we didn't play that great, but we scored. Or, we didn't defend that well, but we didn't give up any goals. Like that happens to teams, and that's okay. Cincinnati against Inter Miami played really well for about 50 minutes. And certainly in the first half, and they provided themselves a ton of opportunities. We saw similarities of that in the Orlando game because there were chances. They just couldn't finish. And to me, the front line has been an issue all year. And it's easy people to look at the statistics and go, oh yeah, Devon, thanks for the fact that, only Lucho Acosta has scored. But if you've actually seen them play a ton, you'll see that Bupenza is new, hurt, scored 2 goals in his first 3 games and 2 and 4 now, I believe, or something like that. But he's hurt, and the actual relationships itself up top haven't really developed for him so far. I would also say that for Brennan Vasquez, the form that we saw last year, coupled with no World Cup, obviously, and then kind of how that funneled into the season of what was it going to be for Nations League, what was it going to be for Gold Cup, like this caused mental frustrations behind the scene that, to me, and I'm just stipulating, I haven't heard anything about this, but having been in situations like that before and been around guys like that before, to me, mentally, that's thrown him off and he hasn't been at his best because he's had chances. So he hasn't scored anywhere near what we saw last season. Sergio Santos is a shell of himself as a player, unfortunately. He scored 2 goals through the first 4 games, or 2 through the first 5, whatever it was, and I don't think he scored since. You'd have to go check me on those stats, but it's been a long time now. He presses and he makes people get into pressure, but again, like having seen them a ton, he seems to always be just there, but not close enough. He's making the right run, but it's too early or too late. Saw this again in the Cincinnati or the Orlando game. Lucho is, for my money, the MVP of the league. I'm sure a lot of Union fans will be unhappy with that because of Daniel's performance this year, but hey, I totally get it, respect it. Gazdag is great. Overall level of creation, what he does in one-on-one situations, for me, Lucho's the MVP, whether it's Daniel or Hani or whoever you want to run through. But if you think about the fact that I just ran through 3 out of 4 on the front line, and I'm making an argument for the MVP on the backside of it, not one single forward is in that conversation. Yep. And you can only do so much as an organization without a striker, whether it's an out-and-out 9 or a supplemental one. And lest we forget, they sold Brenner earlier this year, right? So like now we're talking 4 out of 5 on the front line that haven't matriculated anything. This team was one of the best attacking teams in the league last year, defensively and character-wise. Could they get it done on the back line? Could they win the tough games? That was their identity early on, and the strikers just never came around, and that's a problem for them.
Yeah, I think you summed up Sergio Santos perfectly there. I mean, it's the same thing Union fans would echo as well. It's like he presses, that's great. And I guess the other big thing is he couldn't stay healthy when he was here in Philadelphia. And okay, maybe that's a problem because, he's giving his 100% every single time. He's full speed and everything, and he picks up these muscle injuries in his legs. And so maybe he's proven that he can't be a starter in the league, which is fine. But like you talked about, you had Dom Badgie, who I believe is injured. You have Bupenza, who's still trying to learn the pressing cues, learn the way that Cincinnati wants to play. And so, Sergio Santos, how Pat Noonan wants to play, how Cincinnati want to play. And, he hasn't scored since the Portland game all the way back in April. And so that's got to be a concern for Cincinnati fans if Sergio Santos is called upon to start in the front line this weekend against the Union. But I agree with you about Lucho Acosta, and I'm sure Union fans are going to hate me for that as well. But he's been fantastic. 13 goals, 11 assists, something like that. And we can talk about this here in a little bit with him out this weekend because of the yellow card accumulation. But yeah, for me, it's between him and Hani Mukhtar, and I'm sure Messi's going to have a say here towards the end of the stretch, and we'll see conversations. Oh, Messi! Look what Messi's done for Inter Miami. 8 points out of a playoff spot right now, and I think that's a team that nobody wants to play if they make it into the playoffs. Nashville might. Nashville played well against them in the Leagues Cup final. I thought they played well down in Miami and held them to a nil-nil draw. Cincinnati, like you said, they played well for moments against Miami in the semifinals for Open Cup. So in the Union, we don't have to relive that game against Inter Miami. That was not the Philadelphia Union at all. Jim Curtin, did he get his tactics wrong, his formation wrong? Maybe, but when you concede so early on in that game, all that stuff gets thrown out of the window. So, but this Miami team, I think Messi's going to have a say here for the MVP vote, but I agree. Lucci is definitely going to be in that conversation, probably should win it. And it's crazy to me that we're talking about MVP and everything. How has Pat Noonan only had one coach of the match day or whatever we're calling it now? Like that
and it just happened. Joke. It just happened, right? How insane. We were at the training facility, and no joke, and I can't repeat because we'll just say it's not PG. We're at the training facility prior to the Orlando game, and John Horlander, great comms guy for the front office for FC Cincinnati, certainly one of the best in the league. He walked over and we were talking to him, and I didn't know it until he said it to me. And I kind of looked at him and went, dude, that's not real. And he said, yeah, Dev. He's like, bro, this is his first one. So Pat came over and we had like 5 questions. And, Pat's always great, man. He's like Jim. Jim's cool, man. He's willing to give you the time of day. He's one of the boys, right? And he's willing to chat. He's lived the life we all have together. And though maybe we didn't play together, we all walk through the same doors and understand what it's like to be there. And Pat just kind of looked at us and was like, are you, kidding me? He doesn't really care about that stuff, but he just thought it was funny too. Pat's got this personality about him of, he's not outlandish. Like, I'm loud. I get it. I can be annoying. It's my personality. I respect that. Pat can say the same thing I will, just in a different manner. So we're literally expressing ourselves in the same fashion as to what we're saying, but he does it differently. So I'll go, dude, are you freaking kidding me, man? Come on. And Pat will be like, yeah, you kidding me, man? Come on. And it's just, he's got this little grin about him. But yeah, one award there. It's crazy, but I would also say that it's kind of a testament to the way that team is. Because, certainly Lucho has garnered those accolades because he was correct me if I'm wrong, he's the first one to grab, it's either 3 or 4 players of the match day in a single season, I believe, since Joseph Martinez did
with Atlanta.
18. Yeah, with Atlanta in that record-setting 18 run. Might have been 19 too, because Joseph obviously had a really good year in 19, so maybe he did it in 19, but I'm certainly sure that it could have been in 18. But Pat, as much as we joked about it, he's also just kind of like, look at what the team is made up of, respectfully. And I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm looking at my board right now. Roman Celentano, a Generation Adidas player, drafted 2nd overall. Awesome. 2nd year, great player. For me, was the best player coming out of the draft in 2022. Ian Murphy, what could be. And I'm mind you, I understand that Mosquera is hurt, and he's certainly the outside starting back in the back 3 on the left side, but Ian Murphy, a guy who certainly with the high draft pick in 2022 was never expected to be a starter at this point in time.
No.
And yet, things have been really good for him. You mentioned the good moments in the Open Cup game. Ian Murphy at times just literally put Messi to bed. shut him down. No questions whatsoever. He was quiet. There were no issues. Matt Miazga, great player. Nick Haglund, he's the Cincinnati kid. Literally born, bred, raised. Xavier, like, spent a little bit of time coming out of Xavier with Toronto, but, like, that is the guy that everybody wants on their team if you've got a homegrown, right? It's incredible, man. And as you go through it, it's just guys that are like, for me, outside of Mosquera, probably Wobodo and Lucho, everybody else is just everyone else. And I don't mean that negatively. It's just they're there. And they're really, really, really good at being there too. So
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Well, I mean, you are a national commentator, and it's interesting to get your perspective and not somebody that calls a specific team. So I'm curious. I mean, even though you're on a Philadelphia Union podcast, don't just say things just to try to make the audience happy. But I'm curious, with the Union currently having some work to do to catch Cincinnati and the change in the playoffs this season, where the first series is the best of three. The Union have been a team that they've conceded a lot of goals early on in the first 15 minutes. I believe they've done it 8 times, which is the most in MLS.
Yep.
They've conceded the first goal 14 out of their 26 games this season. Do you think that's a concern? The closer we get to the playoffs, and particularly on the road, that the Union seem to always concede the first goal, and keeping in mind that the playoffs are, like I said, the best of 3, where the Union have to go on the road. You have to go on the road in the first series. Do you think that's a concern for this team?
Of course it is. 100% it is. The only thing I would say is you certainly don't want to concede, number one. You don't want to concede early, number two. I would say that also their ability to find a way to exploit the opponent in game, for me, has always been one of the more impressive things. And it's not necessarily changing systems, which kind of counteracts it, because there are plenty of teams that have the ability to come back in a game. We've seen that from Union. This is a better talking point. Most teams that have the ability to chase that rhetoric are usually changing, and they're changing dynamically across the system. That doesn't happen with the Union. It's not like they concede 8 minutes in and Curtin goes, "Oh, you know what? Screw it. We're going back to the 4. We're going back to 2018. We're going to the double pivot." Like, they don't do that. Now, obviously, we've seen changes in game, but, like, Jim Curtin has been pretty direct this year for the most part about being, this is our setup for this game, and we're going to play it this way. I admire that. And for me, I always liked that better with the manager that I was playing for, that they were willing to stick with a system. Certainly, they can change from game to game and at the end of a game to close things out. But I always wanted to have that familiarity of it. That people at home, and I mean this with all due respect, if you haven't been there, I'm not a guy that's like, "Oh, he wasn't there, she wasn't there, they don't know." I'm not that type of person. But when it comes to system changes, it's a different talking point, because if you haven't been in that situation, don't let a manager fool you where they say, "Oh, formations are just a number." That's BS. You're full of it, because you have a starting point for a reason. You have a structure set up for a reason. You want to start with a 3 because of the idea of dropping down into a 5, getting into a low block, and then exploding on the counter. You want to start in a 3 because you feel like your wingbacks can push their outside backs up and you can pin them in to give yourself freedom within the midfield and give more distribution off the back line. You want to start in a 4 because you feel like your 6 gives you enough coverage from your 2 center backs, and you can get both of your outside backs high in overlapping positions to create more on the attacking front. Any manager that says to you that the formation is meaningless is lying to your face. Now, I do think that numbers are probably have too much emphasis on that. So where I'm going with is, for Philadelphia to regularly say, this is our identity, you know what it is, certainly this season, where you know that they have the ability to basically play structurally within 2 ways. This is our way. This is how we're going to play. Come and beat us. And yet teams can't. They don't. You said a second ago, 2 or 3 minutes ago, this is a Union podcast. Don't hold back. Don't feel like you have to make friends. If there's anything that people will recognize from my commentary on games, for better or for worse, I'm always going to tell you what I see, and I'm always going to tell you how I feel. I look at the Philadelphia Union as one of the best teams in Major League Soccer. Now, certainly, there are levels to that, and certainly there has to be form within that argument. But I can tell you, over the past month, every single manager that I go into a coach call with, whether it was dealing with the end of Leagues Cup or League Cup in general, to the reintegration into MLS football, it's who scares you. Come playoff time, if you're given the ability, who do you not want to play? Philadelphia Union are always one of them. So, yeah, it sucks to go down early, but you always fight back. The team does. And they've got a character thing about them that a lot of teams don't have. I've witnessed it. I've seen them come out and destroy teams. I've seen them, being on calls. Like I can remember for the World Feed being on the call for the Union LAFC game back in April. And I kind of just sat around and went, okay, well, this is interesting. And for people that don't remember, that was Gozdog's penalty. And I think it was like the 85th or something, or 86. I'm close to it. And then Kellen Acosta and that ridiculous goal at the end. And then all the air went out. But it was like, okay, this is a game and they can play with what everybody said at that point in time was an LAFC team that was going to be one of the greatest in MLS history. First of all, get out of here with that crap. And then they came out and laid an egg in the 3-0. But like, the team can play, they can fight back. Yeah, it's concerning, but I would also say that the ability to just score over and over and over again, I don't know, like, do you remember, and maybe it was last year, I just feel like maybe it's from covering the league, I don't remember the multi-goal games and the explosions attacking-wise being this regular as it was last season. Was that there?
Yeah, it was there. Like, it started in July, the first game against DC United, where they won 7-0 or something like that, and then it continued.
But July.
Yeah, this late on. Yeah,
this is from the get-go. Like, literally, you're at the, in my opinion, you're at the starting point for the Union this season. I mean, what? That Champions League was early March, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, I just went back to your schedule. Smacked Columbus 4-1 week 1. Now that the 2-0 loss at Inter was a joke. But, I mean, honestly, since week 1, it's like 4 goals versus Alianza, 2 against Montreal. Skip a couple of weeks. 2 at Atlas, 2 at Chicago, 4 versus Toronto. Like, I remember for sure, Todd, like later in the season, I don't remember it being a regular thing from day one.
That's fair. I'll have to definitely go ahead and look at it. I remember you might be right, actually, because Mikao Ua came in late with this team, and that's when things started to click once he finally got used to playing with this team in the summertime, and the goals started flying in from Kranza, Gazdag, and Ua. So, yeah, I think you are right, if I'm not mistaken. I'll go and look at it.
You didn't score more than 2 goals in a game until July 30th.
Wow.
You beat Houston 6-0. And then from there, it was like 6-4, 6-6. So July 30th. And again, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. But there is something to be said talking about the comeback where we started with all of this, that you can actually go, hey, okay, maybe we are conceding, but we know that we got goals in the back pocket.
Agreed. And I don't want like fans to get negative and everything, because there has been notable results on the road this season. Colorado, 2-1 victory. They came from behind, the Union did. New York City, 3-1 victory on the road. They came from behind. Orlando City, 2-2 draw, came from behind. That Nashville win, 2-0. So, I mean, the Union have proven that they can get results on the road. And yes, it is bad that they concede as often as they do first on the road. But you talked about the character. Jim Curtin talked about the character of this team against Red Bulls. I asked him, and he said, it's not anything that the coaches do. It's 100% the players. And I think he's 100% spot on. Yes, he's created the atmosphere there, but those players have bought in. And any time that they brought in new signings, they've said, hey, look, this is how we act in this locker room. This is how we act as a team. And if you're not here, get out. If you are, then great to have you here. But before I let you go, Devon, this matchup against Cincinnati just absolutely excites me. And, you'll be on the call this weekend, the Hudson Derby, I believe it is, you and Tyler.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a great game right there. I mean, this is huge playoff implications for both of those teams as well. But this Philadelphia FC Cincinnati game, it's going to be super exciting, where I'm expecting a playoff-like atmosphere. Like I said, huge implications earlier on the Shield race. And one thing I'm curious about, though, is, Is Jim Curtin, in your opinion, you think he's going to be able to pick up his first regular season win against Pat? Jim is 0-1 in the regular season against him. And I remember when I had Tom Gallardo, he said, it's the mentor versus the mentee. And if there's anybody in MLS that knows Jim Curtin, it's Pat Noonan. And yes, the Union got a huge win in the playoffs against Cincinnati last season, which you can argue is bigger than any regular season game. But, this has huge implications if the Union want to contend for the Supporters' Shield.
I'll take a 2-2 draw. If I say 2-2 draw, is everyone going to be upset at me because you guys haven't closed ground, or how's that going to work? Look, I would say that, FC Cincinnati's won the league. It's over. It's done with. Like, the normal equation that you can do, by the way, is number of points to number of games. So when the number of points necessary is more than the number of games remaining, usually the percentage is heavily favored against you. So as we're talking right now, New England on 27 games, obviously even, and they're 9 points back. 7 games to go, 9 points back. Doesn't look good. Same argument for St. Louis. The difference is they're 9 points back, 6 games to go. Now, can you average it? Of course you can average. Anything can happen. Like, Nashville can go on a 12-game unbeaten run right now, right? I mean, anything can happen. If I'm a Union fan, I'm looking to find a way, which I'm sure everybody understands it, and it sounds like common sense. Like, I just want to have the ability to grab the highest seed remaining possible. I am not sure still what Orlando is. So they are an enigma. I mean, honestly, I've never, even now, having watched them beat both the number one in the West and number one in the East, I didn't come out of those games going, man, they are good. And yet, the first game that I called for a Philadelphia Union match this year was Philly at NYCFC. And I just came out of the game going, yeah, they're going to decimate teams at times, and which is certainly what we've seen, right? Revolution, kind of the same thing. Like, New England, if they aren't at home, they are up Schitt's Creek. I mean, that's not a curse. That is a statement. And so they're going to get a home game. But with all the turmoil going on behind the scenes, with Bruce Arena stepping away and what's gone on there, one wonders what the locker room is like. So if I'm a Union, I'm 100% gunning for that number 2 spot, because 2 points back with the game in hand, 1 point back of Orlando with the game in hand, go and chase it. I think the regularity of their performances compared to what Columbus or Atlanta or anybody else behind them brings, Nashville's best play that I've seen this season was early on in the year. Now, obviously, I'm just talking Eastern Conference, Todd, but if you give yourself a chance, I see a draw out of this game. I could totally be wrong, but it just kind of feels that way to me with Cincinnati able to produce goals, certainly one of the better defending teams in the league, though they haven't produced a shutout in quite some time. I see them leaking here and there. I also see Union overexposing themselves and FC Cincinnati finding a way to break through, especially with the MVP caliber form of Lucho Acosta. You jump into a 2 spot, 3 at worst, but the hope is that at 2, and then you've given yourself momentum throughout postseason. Go challenge who you want to get the chance that Cincinnati is still there, and you go nip them at the end. I will tell you, though, you came into this saying nobody wants to play Miami, right? The biggest scare, if I'm a Cincinnati fan, I know this is a Union podcast, but the biggest scare that I have right now is Miami finding a way to squeak in, though I personally don't think it'll happen. Miami finding a way to squeak in, they'll win the 8-9 game, and they go play at Cincinnati, who they just beat in Open Cup semis.
Yeah, it's a huge scare, and it's one to keep an eye on, which I know MLS Season Pass, they're all about Messi. So there'll be plenty of Messi talk the rest of the season, whether fans like it or not. It's just the way it is. But Devon, it's been a blast having you here on this podcast and giving you insight on Cincinnati, somebody who's called a lot of Cincinnati games like we talked about, gives fans of the podcast a different voice to hear that's not Tom Gallardo. So I appreciate you coming on, and good luck this weekend on the call in the Hudson Derby with you and Tyler Terrence. And for listeners that aren't following you on social media that want to do that, where can they find you?
They can harass me on Instagram at DVNKRR. They can hate yell at me from the basement or wherever it may be at Devon Kerr 9. And if you're willing to have a cordial conversation, my DMs are always open. I'm here for you all. all jokes aside, Todd, I'm here for the fans, man. Honestly, I'm not a household name. I didn't have the luxury of playing for full senior caps for our national team. My stints in MLS were brief and short, and I wouldn't be in this situation if not for the support of the production teams that I have behind me, and most assuredly from the fans and the opportunity to get to hang out and talk to you all fine people. So you can yell at me, you can talk to me, you can have fun with me. I'll always be there. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. So we haven't done this segment in a very long time, so I'm really excited to do it for this episode, and that is my 3 keys to this game. And I think it's going to come to no surprise to anybody that key number 1 for this game is don't concede first. Duh. Cincinnati is 14-0-4, 67% of their games won this season when they score first. When they score first on the road in MLS, Cincinnati's 3 wins, 0 losses, and 3 draws. We've seen the Union come from behind twice now at Subaru Park when they concede first. And it's not a recipe for success. It doesn't happen often at Subaru Park that the Union concede first. But they cannot do that against the Cincinnati team. This Cincinnati team isn't New York Red Bulls. They're not just going to lay down if they score the first goal. They're going to keep going at the Union. And so it's very important that the Union do not concede first. Number 2, I think counterattacks are going to be huge in this game. You heard Devon talk about how, maybe they're a little bit shaky in the back, Cincinnati, that is. Same can be said about the Union this season. Definitely not the same defensive group. So I think counterattacks are going to be huge in this game for both teams. I'm expecting nothing different. You got to get your transitions perfect. Move the ball quickly. You do that, and I think there will be goals scored off of the counterattacks for both teams, not just the Union. So you want to see the Union concede counters well, but you also want to see them get their transitions perfect and have an opportunity to score. And then number 3, got to be strong defensively on the wings. Barry Allen, Santiago Arias are 2 of the best wingbacks in the league. They love to get forward, particularly Barrial. He loves sending in crosses. And so whether it's Bizo and Nate Harriel on the right-hand side, whichever one doesn't matter, they are going to be occupied this game with Barrial. So look for that to be a key area of this match. Look for that to be an area that Cincinnati tried to take advantage of. And if the Union can take care of that threat, because like we said earlier, no Lucho Acosta in this game, out because of yellow card accumulation. So Cincinnati is going to focus heavily, I believe, on the wings. And if the Union do all 3 of those, I think the Union can come away and get all 3 points. I know Devon said 2-2 draw he's seeing, but I do believe with no Acosta, Cincinnati loses a lot in this game. I'm looking for Ubino Wobido to step up huge for Cincinnati. Not that he doesn't in every game, but he's got to be so solid defensively for Cincinnati this game. He's going to be key for them to get their transitions right when they want to hit the Union on the counterattack. So look for him to control that midfield for Cincinnati this weekend. Like I said at the beginning, Jesus Bueno, Daniel Gazdag, both had knee injuries. Both were out training today in Chester. So we'll get an update on their status from Jim Curtin sometime this week, and you guys will see that update on Twitter. And I don't know what I expect for a scoreline in this game. I don't think it's going to be as high as Devon thought it is going to be, but maybe it is. I do think I have questions still for the midfield for the Union if Jesus Bueno can't go, if Daniel Gazdag doesn't go. Ali Bedoya is out of this game because of yellow card accumulation. Liam Flock, more than likely out. Remember, sports hernia injury. Jim Curtin said that he was going to get a second opinion in Germany. And so if Bueno and Daniel Gazdag can't go in this game, that's a huge loss for the Union. But I'm going off of the fact that they were both practicing today with the team. So that's got to be a good sign, right? So looking forward to this game against Cincinnati. gave you guys my 3 keys. We'll review them on Sunday. That episode will be out on Monday. And yeah, it was great to finally get somebody on here and do a match preview episode with us. And hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Devon's fantastic. Hopefully that came along in our conversation. I'm sure a lot of you guys, Penn State fans out there, love to hear what Devon had to say about your Nittany Lions. So thanks again to Devon for coming onto the podcast. And if you guys aren't following the pod on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow @FreeKickPod. Wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick, be sure to like and review and rate the podcast. And be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/FreeKickPod, to check out the latest goals breakdown video. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is The Free Kick Podcast.